Hi, Cumberland County, and welcome to our weekly video series where we talk to experts in the field of sexual health about issues important to our community and our well-being. My name is Renee, and I'm the director and educator over at your local sexual health center. Today, I am joined by Emma Banks. Emma is a student with the Addictions Community Outreach Program, School of Health and Human Services at the NSCC. Emma, along with Leah, who you remember from our emergency contraception video, is currently on work placement with the center. Emma is helping us research innovative approaches to sexual violence prevention, to update our future programs, and Emma and Leah both are helping us to deliver engaging and incredible content on our social media pages, particularly our TikTok over at Sexual Health Matters. And today we are joined by Dr. Alexa Dodge, a postdoctoral fellow at Dalhousie University in Halifax. Her research looks at criminal and alternative responses to digital forms of sexual violence. Alexa has published several articles on the topic of criminal and restorative justice responses to non-consensual intimate image sharing, and she's passionate about helping to create responses to consensual intimate image sharing that does not blame or shame victims. And it's this passion that connected Emma and I with Alexa, as we here at the center are also looking to approaches that don't blame or shame victims. So hello to Alexa and Emma, and thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Renee.
Yes, happy to be here.
Awesome. So Alexa, we're just going to start off and ask you, what is sexting, and what does the law say about it?
So when I'm talking about sexting, I'm talking specifically about nude or sexual image sharing that's done consensually. So the person who's sharing the image, has chosen to share that image, and the person who's receiving the image has consented to receiving the image. So when non-consensual acts are involved, I personally wouldn't call that sexting. So for me, nude image sharing or sexting, I'm talking about consensual choices that people are making. And what the law says about that in Canada for adults is that it's totally fine. You can consensually share nude images as an adult, and that's absolutely fine. Just with other sexual choices that you make as an adult, you can have sex, and that's totally fine. You can share a sexual image, and that's totally fine, right? It's when things are done without consent that it becomes problematic. Now, in the law, it does get a little bit more confusing for youth, but it's really not as different as some people think it is. So a lot of people will say, if a youth takes a nude image of themselves and keeps it on their phone, that's child pornography. But it's not really, okay? So the Supreme Court of Canada has recognized that youth have the right to take a nude image of themselves and keep that privately on their phone. They've even said in that decision that it could be, helpful to a youth's sexual development and sexual expression. So a youth who privately takes an image and keeps it on their phone, actually, that isn't child pornography. Under the law, we would exclude that. So that's something that a lot of people get wrong. It gets a little, yeah.
I've been getting that wrong, and yeah, thank you for.
So yeah, it's complicated for some people to understand, because if you look at the criminal code, it says, in black and white there, that any nude image of someone under 18 is child pornography. But in Canada, we have common law. So you actually have to look at what has been said in precedent in legal cases. And the Supreme Court of Canada did say they use the example of if two teenagers are having sex and they take a video of that and keep it privately between the two of them, that it would be weird to say, well, those two teenagers can consensually have sex, but they can't consensually record it. Suddenly it becomes illegal. So they said in that instance of someone privately keeping an image that they have created of themselves or with a partner, that's fine. We understand that no harm has happened there, right? Everyone has consented. There's been no harm. So at the time that case happened, it was, many years ago, and we didn't really have sexting as we understand it today. So they didn't specifically talk about, okay, well, what if you take an image and you send it on your phone to someone else? The court hasn't specifically talked about that yet, but many, many academics and legal experts have said that they don't see the possibility in Canada of consensual private nude image sharing among youth being criminalized. And we haven't seen that, right? So when sometimes police officers go into schools and tell kids or tell teenagers that when they're sharing nude images with their partner, that that's child pornography, we really haven't seen that in practice. So police officers are not charging people in Canada for consensually sharing nude images. So I think it's really important when we talk about the law to talk about that fact that if you have sent a nude image to your partner and you're both 16 or whatever, that you are not going to be charged with child pornography offenses. We just really have no reason to believe that you will be. Now, if you send that nude image to your partner and they then share that image without consent, then they can be charged criminally. So it's really what we want to focus on is when those images are shared without consent, that's where we start talking about the fact that there could be a criminal response. So you could either be charged under child pornography laws. A lot of people are trying to get away from using child pornography laws because those were really created to use against adults that are victimizing children and youth. So sometimes youth are still charged with that, but really we're moving towards youth being charged with non-consensual intimate image distribution, which is the same law that adults are charged with. So really the picture isn't as different between youth and adults as some people think it is.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I think that you touched on it a little bit, but the ways that that youth in particular can be blamed and shamed for having even an intimate image of themselves, and also just kind of as a secondary to that question and clarification, you're not aware of any teenager who has been charged with child pornography, say for just taking a picture of themselves and just even keeping it to themselves? Because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about that.
Yeah. So as part of my PhD research, I read all of the cases in Canada that were published, at least, about this, and we don't have any cases that look like that. So really the cases we have are where one youth shares an image of another youth with other people publicly without their consent. So that's when we start to see criminal charges being involved. And again, that's not always going to be the case. So some people who are victims of this, who have their nude image shared with other people, a lot of youth don't want to report to an adult because they're told that it will have to become a criminal investigation. And that really scares a lot of youth because the vast majority of youth that researchers have talked to have said that what's important to them when that happens to them is to be supported, to not be blamed, and to have someone help them get that intimate image down and to help it stop spreading. So, it scares youth if we tell them, if you come forward, we're going to necessarily criminalize the person that did this. In lots of cases, we're able to help youth without it having to go to a criminal level. So, there are ways that that if you're a youth and you have your nude image shared, there are lots of ways that we can help you to get those images down, and lots of ways that we can teach the person that shared it that what they did was wrong without having to do a criminal process. And the really big thing in terms of not victim blaming and shaming these youth is that both youth and adults say that one of the worst parts of having their nude image shared is the way that others around them react to that sharing. And that especially has to do with how parents react. So a lot of youth say, the thing that I found most upsetting about having my nude image shared without my consent was that my parents really looked down on me and really thought poorly of me because of that choice. And so we want to make sure, as parents, as teachers, as friends, that if someone has their nude image shared, we say, you have the right to bodily autonomy. You have the right to choose what you want to do with your image, what you want to do with your body. And the person who shared your image without consent is the person that's done something wrong. And we support you, and we're going to help you to, get images down, to get counseling if you need it, all of those kinds of things. So making sure that the response doesn't center around what the victim could have done differently.
Thank you. I want to bring Emma in. Emma, I know that you also have some questions for Alexa. You want to go ahead?
I do, yeah. So Renee sent me all of your research articles that she had, and I just spent like a few days. I combed through them all. I found all of them so interesting and just like so informative. And I just picked a few questions that I had just like based off some stuff that I read. So in a lot of the research, it talked about how men and women were victimized at similar rates in regards to like non-consensual pornography. But I feel like just like in the world, I usually just hear about women being victimized. So like, why do you think that we only really hear about women, but it's kind of equal for men and women?
Yeah, so we have, it's always hard to know exactly with statistics because we get different answers with different research papers. But in a lot of the really well done research has found that men and women have their intimate images shared without consent at equal rates. And there's this study by Valerie Steeves who looked at teenagers in Canada, and she found, based on her research, that teen boys in Canada actually are a little bit more likely than teen girls to have their nude images shared without consent. And so we don't really know for sure why that is, but I have some ideas. So some of the reasons why we think that might be is that both boys and men have been found to sometimes be more likely to share nude images with someone that they don't know as well. And so we're seeing with girls and women, they're often more likely to share images within an intimate relationship. Whereas boys and men are more likely to share an image with, a friend or someone that they just met or someone that they're flirting with online and those kinds of things. So I think part of it is that their images are sometimes being shared more often because they're sharing it with people that aren't in that trusting relationship. And the other reason that I think that might be is, and again, we don't know for sure, but we have some evidence that, especially among teen boys, that they're sometimes sharing images that the person doesn't want to receive. So teen boys, we have a lot of teen girls that are telling us that teen boys are sending them, images of their genitals that they haven't asked to receive and didn't want to receive. And so in that context, it might be a little more common that girls are then showing those images to each other, like, either as a way to cope with that or laugh it off. You still probably should just delete that image, even if it's sent to you without you consenting to receiving it. So that could be some of the dynamics there. And then in terms of why we're not hearing about boys being victims very often, I think there's a couple different potential reasons for that too. One reason is that we know that with victimization in general, boys are less likely to come forward because they feel like they're supposed to be tough and they're not supposed to need support and those things. So it might be that a lot of that sometimes they are really upset about the image being shared, but they don't feel that they're allowed to seek support or that they should be upset by it. And then in other cases, we also know that sometimes when boys' images are shared, because of cultural expectations around sexuality, it can be much easier in some cases for them to kind of laugh it off. So we have a lot of studies with teenagers where boys' images are shared and people report that, well, everyone just thought it was kind of funny and we all laughed it off and we moved on and didn't really talk about it too much more. Where sometimes when girls' images are shared, it is taken as, meaning something about who they are as a person, and they start to be bullied about it and looked down on for having shared an image consensually. And so this is again where we get into the part about how we respond to someone's image being shared without consent is often more impactful than the image actually being shared without consent. So of course it is a violation of privacy and trust that can be very upsetting when your image is shared without consent. That act on its own can be very, very upsetting. But what really often in the cases where we see it being devastating to people is where, instead of the friends and parents and teachers and counselors around you saying, oh my God, I'm so sorry that that happened to you, that your image was shared without consent. You don't deserve that. Let's see how we can help. Instead, in these really sad and tragic cases, we see that the adults, the peers, the friends around these people say, oh my God, why did you send that image to begin with? Wow, that was a really dumb decision. Or I can't believe you would do that. Or, well, now everyone's going to think you're a slut. So it's really important, as it is with, all sexual choices that people make, to understand that there's, reasons that people make those choices. There's risks and rewards that we're always weighing. And that when someone's trust is violated, we don't blame them. We try to support them.
Yeah, I feel like there's just so much shame and like guilt around sexting that people are just afraid to even tell a parent or a trusted adult that like this happened to them. Yeah, that it's horrible. So do you think it's possible to like remain sex positive and still like educate teens on like the risks of sex and sexting? Is that something that Renee has like drilled into our brains, is like being sex positive like on social media? And it's one of the big things I learned, but I feel like it can be difficult to be sex positive but still, try to lay out the risks of sex and sexting.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely think you can be sex positive and still talk about these things. So just like best practices with all sex education, it's about moving away from this abstinence only discussion. Because if you say that, image sharing, consensual image sharing is always wrong and is always a silly decision to make, then that is automatically going to lead to people continuing to believe these victim blaming beliefs, right? So you really have to go into this conversation like we do with all other good sex ed conversations, talking about how there's reasons people might do this. So some of the reasons people might consensually share intimate images is to build trust in a relationship, to build intimacy. Maybe they are more comfortable doing that and experimenting that way before they get into doing physical acts. There's lots of reasons that people would enjoy and have positive and trustful experiences of sexting. We know that of those teenagers who send nude images, 3/4 of those nude images are never shared with anyone else. So there are lots of cases where teenagers are sending nude images to each other, and trust is being kept, and those images are being deleted after they're seen, and they're not being shared with others. So when we kind of talk about it as if you're necessarily going to be harmed, that's a dangerous idea to keep repeating in society. And so, like you say, with all different kinds of sex ed, it's about talking about how there are reasons that we make choices to do things, and then there are risks to those things. There's risks to having physical sex for certain kinds of physical sex with certain kinds of people can lead to pregnancy, for instance. And there's also a risk with sharing nude images, that those images will be shared without consent, and that's a really, really unfortunate risk that of course we need to talk about. But we also need to talk about it in a way that doesn't only talk to ways to be risk averse to victims. So of course, potential victims that are sharing images should be aware of the risk so that they can make a choice that's right for them. But at the same time, we also need to talk to the people who might share those images, might be perpetrators, right? Most of the education I've seen around this, we don't have any conversation with potential people that are going to share the images. For instance, something that I think could be really useful to talk about is if you receive a nude image from someone, and it's, you both wanted to do this and you enjoyed doing it, that's great. But I think it's a really good tip to maybe delete that image after the fact. like after, you've enjoyed it or whatever, delete that image, because there's a real risk that you are going to be mad someday in the relationship and you might do something with that image you regret. There's a real risk that you're going to be drunk at a party and make a decision to share that image with someone that you're going to regret. There's a real risk amongst boys that your peers are going to pressure you to show the image to prove that you're sexually active or to prove that you have access to women's bodies. And you want to make sure that you are not falling for that and that you're not falling for that pressure. So a great way to not fall for that is to make sure the image isn't on your phone anymore. So I think those are some of the ways that we can talk to people who might share images. And the other thing that I want to be clear about there is sometimes I've heard from teenagers that when they're learning about these things, they're being split into boys and girls, and the girls are being talked to like they're potential victims of having their image shared, and the boys are being talked to like they're potential image sharers without consent. And that is really unfortunate because, like we've already said, boys have their images shared actually slightly more often than girls. And girls are only slightly less likely to share a nude image without consent. So, for instance, we have a couple of cases that have gone to court in Canada where girls found nude images of their boyfriend's ex-girlfriends on their phones, on the boys' phones, and they shared those nude images without consent as a way to try to shame their partner's ex-girlfriend. And so we do have to be talking to girls too about why they shouldn't share other people's nude images. So we do a real disservice when we do this binary gender breakup of the education.
Yeah, something I came across also just during my research was that they said an abstinence-based sexting program works just as well as an abstinence like sex program, which we all know just isn't the way to go. Like we just should educate, and like it's not encouraging them to sex, it's just educating them on like yes, the risk factors, but also like the positives and just like everything in general. So yeah, definitely. So do you
Yeah,
think the
exactly.
education system could do something differently to like educate them on like revenge porn and like sending non-consensual images?
Yeah, I think, building those conversations into broader conversations about consent and about healthy relationships. So, not treating it as this scary technology thing that's entirely separate from discussions of relationships. And rather, we want to fit those conversations right into our conversations about healthy relationships and consent. So, I think that's really important to not make it. I think youth don't connect with it when we talk about it as this scary thing that the internet has created, but rather they connect with it when it's built into other conversations about consent and relationships. Because for youth, we know that, and for many of us now, online and offline worlds and online and offline forms of consent and sexual expression are all connected. And there's no conversation, we can't have a conversation about consent online that's not connected to conversations about consent and trust and being a good partner offline.
And then I just had one last question. I don't know if Renee had anything to add in there or not. No. I think you kind of touched on it, but just what should you do if someone shares a photo of you?
So we have a couple resources that I shared with you there to bring up on the screen. So the MediaSmarts one I think is a really useful tool if someone shares your image without consent. Yeah, so this is the MediaSmarts website. And this is a really great website for teachers, parents, and youth to get resources about sexting and non consensual intimate image sharing and safe relationships online. So this is a Canadian site, which is really important because sexting and non-consensual image sharing laws are really different in the United States. So it's really important to make sure you're using Canadian sites. So this is great. Um, yeah, look at all these great resources. So if I can get you to just go back to that last page. Okay, so this is a little tip sheet that you can share as a PDF, and it's also on the website here. So it says, help, someone shared a photo of me without my consent. And then the next line down here you can see is don't panic. There's a lot of things you can do, or there's a lot you can do to fix things. So I think this first sentence here, don't panic, is so important, because one thing that really troubles me about a lot of the tools that we give to youth is that we're often trying to scare youth out of intimate image sharing. So I have seen, very recently created education videos for youth. There's one in Ontario I'm thinking of that says, if your nude image is shared without consent, it could haunt you for the rest of your life, and the image is going to go all around the world. It's going to be internationally available for the rest of your life. It'll ruin your job and career application. It'll ruin your job and school applications. You might not get into university, all of these things. That's terrifying for a youth who's had their intimate image shared. So I love this don't panic line, because it's really important to remember that that is not going to be the case for the vast, 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 vast majority of nude images of youth that are shared. So in most cases where youth have had their nude image shared without consent, it's been shared, with other youths through text messages or in a private Dropbox account, as we saw in Nova Scotia, in Facebook messages. In a lot of cases, these images are not widely available on a Google search engine, for instance. Secondly, even if your image has been posted publicly and is searchable, in order for someone like a career, someone that you've applied for a job to find that, it would have to have been shared with your name attached, probably with your face, so that it's, unless you have a really recognizable name. And because Google and Facebook and Instagram and a lot of these tech companies have made commitments to taking down nude images, even in the rare case that your image has been shared publicly and with your name and all of these things, there is a good chance that that you will be able to get those images down. So you will be able to get them delisted from a Google search in most cases. So of course there have been many cases where images have been really hard to get down, but in most instances, there are people who can help you to get those images down, get them so they don't come up in a Google search. And in a lot of cases, they've been shared within your school or within your community on cell phones. And in most cases, as this handout here says, when you contact or you get an adult to help you contact the youth or the parents of the youth who've shared those images, in most cases, they'll delete those images from their phones, right? So we have to stop telling you that this is the end of the world. We know that in most cases, it's not. In most cases, a few youth have received images on their phones, and they'll delete those once they know that what they've done is wrong and that they're, going to be in trouble for having broken someone's trust in that way. So they give, like I said, they give lots of stuff here. You can ask the platform where it was shared to take it down. They're going to be especially quick with that if you're under 18. It's in their interest not to have those images up. It even gives you some more kind of tech knowledge here about a search service called TinEye that can help you see if photos have been posted anywhere else and get those down. And again, you would only need to do that in a case where it's been more publicly shared, which isn't as common. And then again, it says here, in Canada, it's a criminal offense to share someone's image without their consent. So you're going to have some people behind you that can support you in responding to this. And in Nova Scotia, we also have the CyberScan unit. And so that's a unit that can also help with getting images down and providing support without having to go to the police. And a lot of these cases are going to just be dealt with at the school level, at a community level or at a school level. So you also, don't have to worry that necessarily this case is going to have to become this huge thing that you have to go to a court case and sit there for 2 years. And in most cases, you're going to be able to deal with this at the school level and with, principals making sure that everyone deletes those images and choosing a correct, hopefully a good response that helps the person who shared your image without consent to learn their lesson. that is not appropriate behavior. And it also provides here the number and the site for Kids Help Phone. And I think I have that here on your third tab too. Oh no, I didn't. Okay, well, I didn't share Kids Help Phone, but the Kids Help Phone website is really great. So they've made sure that um, their resources are, fairly sex positive. So it doesn't have that victim blaming and shaming, and it does more of a supportive response that's, again, about, like, don't panic, there are ways that you can get support and that you can get help for this. So it's really good. It's really good to see that Kids Help Phone has a non-judgmental response in that way. So that's great. And then the first tab here is the Webbing with Wisdom website, and this was created along with youth in Toronto. And so it has some really great resources here. Again, a really non-judgmental discussion for youth about how there are both risks and rewards to choosing whether or not you want to sext, and making sure that it's, again, very non-judgmental. And they also share Kids Help Phone there, so that's great. And they even give some tips for sexting more safely if that's something that you've decided you want to do. And then the other great thing about this here is there's a video here, which, we won't play, but anyone can find this on the Webbing with Wisdom website. And the video explains the law around sexting for youth in Canada in a really detailed way. So probably too detailed to really necessarily even need to share with youth. But really useful for people that are wondering what are the specifics in Canadian law, because, like I said, the main takeaway that we need to know is that if your image is shared without consent, that's when the law is really going to be involved. But this does get into the details of how, if there's a big age gap between the two of you, that could be a problem, and all those kind of nitty gritty legal details that do make it a little more messy. So this video gets into all the nitty gritty. So that could be useful just if you're worried that you don't have the law quite sorted out in your mind. And then the last one I had one more tab, the last one there. So this is just an example of, an ad that, a PSA, I guess, around non-consensual intimate image sharing that I think is really great for a couple of reasons. So it says sharing an intimate photo of someone without their consent is never okay. It is also against the law. And then it says delete without consent, it's not sent. So I think this is a great resource because so many of the kind of images that we've created for youth around this actually targets the victim and are things that say, or the potential victim, and are things that say, don't share your nudes, don't share. There's this one that was created in Quebec that says your melons, they shouldn't be sent. And that kind of framing is only directed at people who might consensually share images. It says your melons shouldn't be sent, right, is the wording. Where this is saying, showing someone who's received a nude and they're deciding, should they now delete this or should they send it out? And it's saying, without consent to share this more broadly, you shouldn't do it. You should delete an image after you receive it and not send it out further. So I think this is a really simple and great message in that particular campaign.
If folks have any questions, please reach out to us here at your local sexual health center or any of the sexual health centers across Nova Scotia. We all work under the umbrella of Sexual Health Nova Scotia, and there are advocates and educators who are passionate about providing support to you. So give us a call. Thank you, Alexa, and thank you, Emma, and we'll see everybody soon.
Thanks so much.